And this is what you replaced me with, just because I couldn't give you a child?
Yes. A woman who can't give me children has no place in my life.
The day Emmanuel Bello married a second wife, he did it quietly. No announcement, no warning, no conversation. Ada found out the same way the rest of the neighborhood found out, through a WhatsApp message. A blurry photo, a white canopy, her husband in an agbada, smiling like a man who had just been freed from prison, and beside him, a woman, young, fresh, glowing in a coral aswebi that cost more than Ada's entire wardrobe. Ada stared at that photo for 4 minutes without blinking. Then she put down her phone, walked to the kitchen, and finished cooking the egusi soup she had started that morning, because that is what women like Ada do. They swallow the earthquake. They season the pain with salt and put it on the fire. They keep moving, not because they are strong, but because they have never been given permission to fall apart. Ada was 34 years old. She had been married to Emmanuel for 8 years. 8 years of waking up at 5:30 in the morning. 8 years of ironing his shirt so sharp you could write your name on the crease. 8 years of managing his home, entertaining his business friends, defending his name in every conversation, and sitting in the front row of Dominion Worship Center every Sunday like a woman whose life was perfectly in order. But behind that pressed wrapper and that careful smile was a woman who had been quietly breaking for years, because Ada's womb had not produced a child. Not for lack of trying, not for lack of praying. She had done everything a woman in her position could do. She had visited 3 hospitals in Lagos, 1 specialist in Abuja, and 1 old woman in Edo State who gave her bitter black liquid to drink at midnight while facing east. She had done IUI. She had started IVF twice. The second time, she made it to the transfer stage and felt something she had never felt before. Hope, clean and sharp like fresh air. Then the test came back negative, and that hope shattered so loudly inside her, she was surprised Emmanuel did not hear it from the next room. He did not ask how she was feeling that night. He was on a call with a business contact. He laughed 3 times during that call. She counted. What Emmanuel saw when he looked at their marriage was not a woman who was suffering. He saw a problem that needed a solution. He was the kind of man who wore designer shoes and quoted scripture in the same breath. He drove a Prado, sat on the board of 2 companies, and had a mother, Mrs. Titi Bello, who called every Sunday not to ask how Ada was doing, but to ask the same question she had been asking for 6 years. Any news? 2 words, wrapped in a smile, sharp as a blade. Mrs. Titi Bello was the kind of woman who wore expensive lace to church and spoke in a soft voice that somehow always managed to wound. She had never shouted at Ada, she had never insulted her directly, but every visit, every phone call, every family gathering, she found a way to remind the room that Ada had not yet performed her most important duty as a wife. My son deserves to hear the sound of children in his house, she said one Christmas, loud enough for the entire living room to hear, while Ada was in the kitchen cutting chicken. Nobody corrected her. Nobody said anything. Ada heard it, felt it land on her chest like a stone, and continued cutting. That was the world Ada lived in. Quiet violence dressed in lace and perfume. So when the WhatsApp photo came, that blurry image of Emmanuel and his new bride under a white canopy, Ada was not completely shocked. Somewhere deep in her body, in the part of her that had learned to read the silence in her marriage, she had known something was coming. She just did not know it would come like this, without a word, without a fight, without even the dignity of a warning. She finished the egusi soup, she set the table, she sat down and ate alone. And that night, when she finally allowed herself to cry, she cried for a long time, not just for the marriage, but for the version of herself she had buried slowly, year by year, trying to be enough for a man who had already decided she wasn't.
Her name was Vivian, 27 years old, light-skinned in that way that made older women in the compound immediately suspicious. She arrived on a Saturday morning, in a black Camry that Emmanuel drove himself, which was already an insult because he had not driven Ada anywhere in 2 years. He always said he was too busy, too tired. That was what drivers were for. But for Vivian, he drove. She stepped out of that car in white palazzo trousers and a silk blouse, sunglasses pushed up on her head, a small designer bag hanging from her wrist, and she looked at the compound, at the flowers Ada had planted along the fence, the clean tiles Ada scrubbed every Saturday, the curtains Ada had chosen, and she smiled like someone who had just taken over a business. Ada watched from the upstairs window. She watched Emmanuel carry Vivian's bag. She watched him touch the small of Vivian's back as he led her to the door. She watched him laugh at something Vivian whispered in his ear. A real laugh, full and easy, the kind Ada had not heard from him in years. Her hands gripped the window ledge. The compound staff, 2 gatemen and a housekeeper named Blessing, watched with wide eyes and carefully blank faces. They had worked in that house long enough to know that what they witnessed this morning would have consequences. Blessing caught Ada's eye from below and quickly looked away. Emmanuel had converted the boys' quarters at the back of the compound into a small, self-contained apartment for Vivian. New furniture, new curtains, a split-unit air conditioner that hummed like a promise. Ada had watched the renovation happen over 2 months and asked no questions because every time she opened her mouth to ask, Emmanuel's face closed like a shop at night. She had told herself it was for a business guest. She had lied to herself well. Now Vivian was here and the lie was standing in the compound in white palazzo trousers, and Ada had to decide in real time what kind of woman she was going to be. She came downstairs. She walked into the living room where Emmanuel was showing Vivian around with the energy of a tour guide, pointing at the television, the sound system, the kitchen, her kitchen, like a man proud of his property. He saw Ada on the stairs and his face did something complicated. Not guilt exactly, more like mild inconvenience. Ada, he said, this is Vivian. I told you about this. He had not told her. He had mentioned once, 3 months ago, in a conversation Ada had not fully understood the weight of, that a man in his position could not leave his legacy to chance. That was all. That was the conversation. No names, no dates. No Ada, I am taking a second wife and I need you to be okay with it. Just a vague statement about legacy. And then a WhatsApp photo. Vivian smiled at Ada. It was a careful smile, respectful even, the smile of a woman who had been coached. Good morning, Ma, Vivian said. Ma. She had called Ada Ma, like Ada was old, like Ada was already a relic. Ada smiled back, a clean, practiced smile that revealed nothing. Welcome, Ada said, and she walked back upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed. The room was quiet. The fan turned slowly overhead. Outside, she could hear Emmanuel laughing again, that easy laugh, the one she used to own. She picked up her phone and called her younger sister, Chisom. She's here, Ada said. A pause on the other end. I'm coming, Chisom said.
Vivian was pregnant within 4 months. 4 months, that was all it took. 4 months of Vivian in that back apartment, of Emmanuel disappearing after dinner and coming back smelling of a different perfume, of the compound rearranging itself around this new reality. And then, one morning, Blessing, the housekeeper, came to Ada's room with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral. Madame, Blessing said, the other madame, she is pregnant. Ada was sitting at her dressing table, putting on earrings. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. Her own face stared back at her. Composed, unreadable, the face of a woman who had been practicing composure for years. Thank you, Blessing, she said. Blessing hovered. Madame, are you? Thank you, Blessing, Ada said again, quietly, finally. Blessing left. Ada put on the second earring. She stood up. She straightened her skirt. She went downstairs and made breakfast. But inside her chest, something was happening that she could not name. It was not quite jealousy. It was not quite grief. It was something older and heavier. The particular pain of a woman who had tried everything, spent money she did not have, endured procedures that left her bruised and hollow, prayed until her knees ached, and then watched another woman achieve in 4 months what 8 years could not give her. The news spread through the family like a brush fire. Mrs. Titi Bellew called Emmanuel 3 times that day. She did not call Ada at all. She arrived the following weekend with a food flask and a new wrapper for Vivian and enough joy to fill the entire compound. She hugged Vivian the way she had never once hugged Ada, long, warm, like a mother welcoming home a child who had finally done something right. She passed Ada in the corridor with a smile that said everything her mouth did not say. The church women were next. Word reached Dominion Worship Center by the following Sunday. Ada sat in her usual seat at the front and felt the shift in the atmosphere. The way eyes slid away from hers, the way conversations paused when she walked past. One woman, Sister Ngozi, who led the women's fellowship and always wore a headgear shaped like a satellite dish, had the nerve to say, loudly, to another woman 3 seats away, "God does not make mistakes. When one vessel cannot carry the water, He provides another." Ada heard it. She was meant to hear it. She opened her Bible and stared at the words without reading them. What nobody in that church knew, what Ada had not told anyone except Chisom and her doctor, was that 2 months earlier, she had received news that changed the entire story. News she had not yet decided what to do with. The specialist in Abuja had found the problem, and the problem was not Ada. It had never been Ada. The test results were clear. Emmanuel was the one. The fertility issue, the years of silence and shame, the herbs and injections and procedures, the prayers and whispers, and the way the whole world had looked at her like a broken pot, all of it, every single year of it, had been pointed at the wrong person. Ada was fine. Ada had always been fine. Emmanuel was the one who could not give her a child. And he knew. The doctor had told him 6 months ago, before Ada found out. He had gone for the test alone, received the results alone, and said nothing. He had planned a second marriage, brought another woman into the compound, and said nothing. He had let the world believe it was Ada's fault because the alternative, admitting the truth, was something his ego could not survive. And now, Vivian was pregnant, which meant one thing that Ada had not allowed herself to think about yet, a thing that sat at the back of her mind like a locked room she was not ready to open. If Emmanuel cannot father a child, then whose baby is Vivian carrying? Ada did not go to anyone with what she knew. Not yet. She moved through the house like water, quiet, present, barely disturbing anything. She cooked, she cleaned. She went to work at the school where she taught English to JSS 2 students who adored her because children always know who is genuinely kind. She came home. She greeted Emmanuel. She nodded politely at Vivian, who had started showing by now, a small, neat bump that everyone treated like a miracle sent from heaven. At family dinners, Emmanuel had started insisting on them, a forced togetherness that made Ada's skin crawl. Vivian sat close to Emmanuel, one hand always resting lightly on her stomach, and Emmanuel would touch the bump with a pride so enormous, so visible, it was almost painful to watch. Because Ada alone knew that pride was built on a lie. Chisom came every weekend. She sat in Ada's room and watched her sister with worried eyes. "You have to say something," Chisom said one Saturday. "Ada, you cannot just sit on this information." "I am thinking," Ada said. "You have been thinking for 2 months. Some situations require long thought." Chisom grabbed her sister's hand. "He humiliated you. He brought another woman into your home and let the whole world blame your womb when all along it was him. Ada, say something. Do something." "If I talk," Ada said carefully, "Emmanuel will deny it. He will get his own doctor to produce a different result. He has money. He has connections. I would just be the bitter first wife who is making up stories. Chisom was quiet. But if I wait and I get what I need first. She did not finish the sentence, but her eyes said everything. What Ada had started doing, quietly and without anyone noticing, was building a case. She had made copies of the medical documents from Abuja specialist. She had started speaking to a lawyer, a female lawyer named Mrs. Adaze Peters, who operated from a clean, no-nonsense office in Victoria Island, and who listened to Ada's story with the focused attention of a woman who had heard many stories like this and was tired of how they usually ended. You have grounds, Mrs. Peters said. Fraud, emotional abuse, deliberate concealment of medical information that directly affected your life decisions. And depending on how we approach this, we may also look at the property. The house is in his name, but you have lived there and contributed to that home for 8 years. Ada listened carefully. And the pregnancy, Ada asked. Mrs. Peters looked at her. What about it? If Emmanuel cannot father a child and Vivian is carrying a child, whose child is it? A long silence. That, Mrs. Peters said slowly, is a separate but very important question. The answer came not from a doctor or a lawyer or a private investigator. It came from Blessing, the housekeeper who had worked in that compound for 4 years and knew every corner of it. Blessing, who had been caught between 2 women and had quietly, steadily been watching and collecting information the way only people who are considered invisible can. She knocked on Ada's room door on a Tuesday evening when Emmanuel was traveling for business. She sat down, she folded her hands, and she told Ada everything. Vivian had not come into the marriage as a stranger. Vivian and Emmanuel's younger brother, Femi, had been in a relationship for 2 years before Emmanuel saw her and wanted her for himself. Femi had stepped back, or been pushed back, because you did not refuse your older brother, especially not when that older brother was the one who paid your rent and funded your business. But stepping back did not mean stepping away. They have been seeing each other, Blessing said, eyes down, voice low. Since she moved in when Oga travels, every time. Ada sat very still. Femi is the one, Blessing said. The baby, it is Femi's baby. The room was completely silent. Outside, a generator hummed. Somewhere down the street, a car horn sounded. The ordinary sounds of a Lagos evening continuing as if the earth had not just shifted on its axis. Ada looked at Blessing for a long time. How do you know this for certain? Ada asked. Blessing reached into the pocket of her uniform and placed a phone on the bed, an old Samsung. Vivian left it in the kitchen one day. I saw the messages before she came back. Ada did not touch the phone. Blessing, she said carefully. Do you understand what you are doing? I understand, ma. I have been in this compound 4 years. I have watched what they did to you. It is not right. Ada looked at the phone for a long moment. Then she picked it up.
Emmanuel came back from his business trip on a Friday evening, full of good energy and a duty-free bag that contained a bottle of perfume for Vivian and nothing for Ada. He did not notice that Ada was different. He never noticed Ada anymore. But Ada had been busy in his absence. She had spoken to Mrs. Peters again. She had made copies, careful, documented copies of everything Blessing had shown her. She had been in contact with Femi, Emmanuel's younger brother, who had cracked faster than anyone expected. Because Femi, it turned out, was a young man drowning in guilt. He had not wanted this. He had not wanted to step aside for his brother. He had not wanted Vivian to marry Emmanuel. He had gone along with it because that was what you did in families like theirs, where the eldest son's word was gospel. But when Ada sat in front of him at a quiet restaurant in Ikeja and put everything on the table, the medical documents, the messages, the truth, Femi lowered his head into his hands and wept. I am sorry, he said. I am so sorry, Ada. I did not know he was going to blame you. I did not know all of this was happening to you. The baby is yours, Ada said. It was not a question. Femi said nothing for a long time. Yes, he finally said. Ada nodded. She picked up her bag. She stood up to leave. Ada, Femi said, what are you going to do? She looked at him. The right thing, she said, which is what everyone in your family should have done from the beginning. The Sunday she chose was not an accident. Ada had grown up understanding that in Nigerian life, some things must be witnessed to be real. A secret told in a lawyer's office dies in that office. A secret told in church in front of the whole congregation, in front of the women who called you barren, and the mother-in-law who smiled at you with pity, and the husband who let the world believe you were the broken one, that kind of secret has a different kind of life. It grows wings. She had told Mrs. Peters her plan. Mrs. Peters had told her it was unconventional. Ada said she knew. Mrs. Peters had told her it was risky. Ada said she knew that too. But have I broken any law? Ada asked. Mrs. Peters was quiet for a moment. No, she said, you have not. So, on that Sunday, Ada arrived at Dominion Worship Center in a cream dress and matching heels. She sat in her usual front row seat. She sang the opening worship with her hands raised and her eyes open because she was not there to worship today. She was there to bear witness. Emmanuel sat 3 seats away from her. Vivian on her left, her bump now 6 months full and impossible to ignore. Mrs. Titi Bellu had come that Sunday too. A coincidence or perhaps God arranging the stage in her best lace and enormous headgear. After the sermon, Pastor Ike called for testimonies. Ada stood up. She spoke quietly, no drama, no tears, no shouting. She said she had been a member of this church for 9 years. She said she had sat in that building and been prayed for week after week for the fruit of the womb. She said she was grateful for every prayer. Then she said she wanted to share what she had recently found out. She said the fertility problem in her marriage was never hers. She said the test results from a specialist, which her lawyer now held copies of, confirmed that her husband was the one who could not father a child. She said her husband had known this for 6 months before she found out and said nothing while the world blamed her womb. The church was absolutely silent. She said she wanted to go further. She said the pregnancy everyone was celebrating was not her husband's child. She said the baby belonged to her husband's younger brother, Femi, and that she had his written acknowledgement to confirm it. She did not come to that church to destroy anyone. She came because she had spent 8 years being quietly destroyed in that same building by the whispers and the prayers and the pity, and she wanted everyone who had participated in her shame to understand what they had actually been participating in. Then she sat down. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then the building erupted.
It does not arrive on a white horse. It does not come with trumpets or dramatic music. Justice, when it finally comes for ordinary women, arrives quietly, in small, irreversible ways, in doors that close behind the people who wronged you, in tables that turn so slowly you almost miss it, and then one morning you wake up and the weight is gone, and you realize the turning is complete. Emmanuel's world did not collapse in one day. It collapsed the way a building does when the foundation is rotten, slowly, then all at once. The church members had witnessed everything. In a community where reputation is currency, what Ada said that Sunday morning spent Emmanuel's account down to 0 in a matter of days. His business partners began to hear the story. His board colleagues, his friends who had attended the wedding, who had toasted to his legacy, who had congratulated him on the pregnancy. Nobody said it to his face. That is not how it works. They just became unavailable. Calls went unanswered, meetings were postponed, invitations stopped coming. Mrs. Titi Bello, the woman who had spent 6 years suggesting to anyone who would listen that Ada was a dry riverbed, Mrs. Titi Bello did not show her face in church for 3 months after that Sunday. When she finally returned, she sat at the back. She wore no headgear. Vivian left the compound 2 weeks after the Sunday revelation. She went back to her family. Femi, to his credit, stepped up. He was not a rich man, he was not ready, but he was present, and he told the truth to everyone who needed to hear it, and he sat with Vivian through the remaining months of the pregnancy. And when the baby came, a girl, small and loud and perfectly healthy, he held her with shaking hands and called her his daughter. Ada did not feel anything complicated about the baby. A child had done nothing wrong. A child was innocent. She sent a small gift through Chisom, a white blanket, no card. The divorce was finalized 7 months after that Sunday. Mrs. Peters was thorough. The house became Ada's. 8 years of marriage, documented contribution to the household, and a husband whose credibility had been comprehensively destroyed gave Ada's lawyer everything she needed. Emmanuel signed. He did not fight. There was nothing left to fight with. On the day Ada got the keys, her keys now, to her house now, to the compound with the flowers she had planted along the fence, she stood at the gate for a long time. She thought about the woman she had been when she first walked through that gate as a new bride, young, hopeful, terrified, so eager to be loved. She thought about the years she had spent shrinking, swallowing, surviving. She thought about every bathroom floor she had cried on, every prayer she had prayed facing a ceiling that seemed made of stone. Every time someone had looked at her with pity and she had smiled and thanked them. She thought about the Sunday morning, the silence before the eruption, the strange, clean feeling of finally being heard. She pushed the gate open and walked in. Blessing was in the compound watering the flowers. She looked up. She smiled. A real smile, the kind that takes over the whole face. "Welcome home, madam," Blessing said. Ada looked around the compound, at the flowers along the fence, the clean tiles, the curtains she had chosen still hanging exactly as she had placed them. She breathed in. "Thank you, Blessing," Ada said. "Call a plumber tomorrow. I want to fix that tap in the back bathroom." "Yes, ma." Ada walked into her house. Her house. She went to the kitchen and put on the kettle. She sat at the kitchen table and looked out the window at the morning light coming through the leaves. Her phone buzzed. A message from Chisom. "How does it feel?" Ada smiled. She typed back slowly, like the first day of something. Outside, a neighbor's child was laughing, a loud, free, unself-conscious laugh that bounced off the walls of the street. Birds were doing something complicated in the mango tree by the fence. The kettle began to whistle. Ada got up to make her tea. She was 35 years old. She had survived a marriage that tried to make her disappear. She had her health, she had her sister, she had a house with flowers along the fence and a kettle that was singing. She had herself, fully, finally. And some mornings, in the quiet before the world wakes up, that is more than enough. If this story moved you, share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you never miss a story, because every week we tell the stories that don't get told anywhere else.